Is it that bit of software that you're no longer using, the thing that's given the hackers access to your computer systems? Section 6, software patching. We're moving on now to how we make sure the software we're using in our organisations is not the weak point in our cybersecurity. I'm pleased to see that there is a lot more awareness of the need to keep things up to date now. The WannaCry attack in 2017 really helped raise the awareness, and the more recent Microsoft Exchange exploit has reminded us how important keeping things updated really is. Whilst we're now good at keeping our operating systems up to date, it's often the applications we use that get overlooked. What you often tend to find is your computer is full of software that you no longer use or no longer remember what it was for. No one's stopped to clean up what you don't actually use or need anymore. From a cybersecurity perspective, it's often this forgotten about software that then does not get updated and leads to a cybersecurity breach. The next set of questions applies to all your computers, servers, mobiles, routers and firewalls. And whilst Cyber Essentials did not mention it here, it's also worth thinking about things like your printers and your CCTV systems and any other devices that you have connected to your network. There can all be a vulnerability. Question 1, are all your devices supported? In order to make sure you are getting appropriate security updates, you need to make sure your devices are still supported by the manufacturer. When it comes to your computers and servers, this is about what operating systems you're using. You need to list the operating systems and version number. It's not enough to simply say Windows 10. You need to also give us the build version, something like either 20H2 or 19042. That's what we're looking for. And it's the same with Mac. Give us the full OS X version number, like 11.2.3, and the same again for Linux. Whilst the question does not ask for it, I also like to see the firmware version of your router and firewall too. These so often get overlooked for updates. It's usually one of the first things we pick up when we do an on-site audit for someone. Question 2, are all applications supported? The same as in question 1, are all of the applications you use kept up to date? In my experience, these are far more common to be out of date. Either you've not renewed the software license or you've just not applied the updates. I know what it's like. We have a lot of costly software in the IT space, but if you're not keeping it up to date, then you're leaving yourself open to potential security vulnerabilities. In the notes box, you should include a summary of the applications that you use along with the major version where appropriate. What we are looking to see here as assessors is your understanding of the software you've got in use within your organisation and how you are keeping it up to date. If you can explain how you're managing that, it's a big tick in the box here. Question 3, is all your software licensed properly? How are you making sure all the software you've got is licensed according to the publisher's recommendations? i.e., how do you make sure you are not using pirated or illegal software within your organisation? It's quite common for pirated or cracked software, as they call it, to also contain malicious code. And if you've not licensed it properly in the first place, you're far less likely to be getting regular software updates. You also need to confirm you are using software within its licensing terms. For example, with Microsoft Office 365, we see a number of organisations sharing the software licenses between users. That's not compliant with the terms. Each user should have their own license in that case. It's fine to be using open source software so long as you're adhering to the licensing terms and it gets regular security updates from the community, of course. Why is this important? If you're not prepared to make sure you're licensing software properly, you're less likely to be checking you're keeping it up to date as well. Question 4, are all high risk and critical security updates applied to your devices within 14 days? So if you look back at some of the big attacks of the last few years, they've been centered around vulnerabilities that had already been patched. It's just people had not applied the updates. Cyber Essentials says that all high risk and critical security updates should be applied within 14 days. How do you make sure this happens? Remember, we're not just talking about your computers and servers here, but your firewall devices too. These so often get forgotten about, yet they are the gateway into your network in the first place. You need to be keeping them up to date. You need to confirm this happens and then explain to us how you make sure updates are always applied in time. For things like Windows 10, you can simply have auto update enabled, but you do need to make sure that you've not got something that's delaying them. Windows lets you defer security updates for up to 30 days, but that's not compliant with Cyber Essentials. Cyber Essentials said they must be applied within 14 days. What about your firewalls? How do you make sure they're applied within the same timescale? Question 5, are all high risk and critical updates applied to your applications within 14 days? So the same as above, except this time for your software and applications. How do you make sure that you apply security updates to all your applications within the correct time frame too? This also applies to tools that the software relies on, like Java or the .NET framework. All of that needs to be kept patched up to date. Question 6, have you removed any software that's no longer supported? I mentioned this back at the start. It's so common to audit a machine and find software that's out of date and not been used for a couple of years. And what we're looking for as assessors here is that you have a process for identifying and removing software that's either no longer in use or no longer gets regular security updates. If you're no longer using the software, why keep it on your machine? It's just clogging things up and it's liable to be forgotten about. If it's been forgotten about, it's likely to no longer be getting security updates. And that's just asking for trouble. You often find the cause of a security breach is down to an old piece of software everybody's forgotten about and no one can really tell you what it does anymore. You should be aware of each piece of software on your machine and what purpose it serves. Don't forget as well about the tools that may have been left behind by old bits of software, things like Java and Flash and old versions of the .NET framework. And that's the end of section 6, nice and short. Before we move on to section 7, all about how we manage the access our users have into our systems, it's time to share how I help many of my consultancy clients cover off this section on software patching. So the thing I find helps most with this section is to create an approved software list. In its simplest form, it's a documented list of all the software in use within your organization, along with how it's licensed, the version number, and where appropriate, the computers it's installed on. Having such a list means that at management level, you can review and approve the software in use within your organization. It means you can track it. It means you can know which software gets its auto updates and which has to be manually updated. And it also gives you a document you can ask your IT provider to audit all of your machines against. The same list also comes in handy when you're setting up a new computer. It's a list of all the software that you need to get installed. Pair this approved software list with the asset list that we talked about in episode 4, that's got the firmware versions of your firewall and it's also got the software versions of your computers on, and you've pretty much got this section nailed. That's section 6 all wrapped up. Next episode is looking at your staff and how you manage their access to your IT systems. See you then.